Hi, I'm Damon Rascala, here for the Practice Makes Perfect video series. And today I'm joined by Sharanjit Paddam from Finity Consulting. Sharanjit, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Damon.
Now, you're an actuary with Finity and you do lots of different things day to day. But why don't we start with perhaps just a brief description of what takes up most of your time?
Yeah, so I've been focused on climate change for the last decade and looking at how it impacts on governments, insurers, and banks, helping them understand what the risks are arising, what the opportunities are arising, and how they feed that into their strategy and their business, and to make them more resilient to those changes coming forward.
Yeah, fantastic. Climate change is such a big issue. I think it might be worth just touching on, you've sort of outlined some of the clients that you work with, but in particular, the risks and rewards that they face, not just now, but I guess projecting into the future, how that might look. If you could expand on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I think it might be useful for us to think about an example here. So one of the areas that we'll all know is buying a home insurance every year. And as climate change kicks in, and we're already starting to see this happen, the costs of disasters are going to go up. And everyone's going to see that in their household through impacts on their insurance premiums. And so insurers have to think about what's that going to mean? How much would it go up by? Are people going to be able to afford it? Is it the right product? And then that will also flow through to thinking about banks, because when banks lend money on a house or provide a business loan, they usually secure it against a property, and they'll require you to get insurance as part of that before they can lend to you. Now, if that insurance becomes unaffordable or in the extreme unavailable, then that's an impact on the banking system. So it's kind of at that very fine lens, you can see how climate change is starting to affect people's household finances, but also affect their ability to borrow money and to finance new projects. And that's going to be replicated at all sorts of levels across the economy.
If I can just ask, and maybe we're taking a step back here, but climate change can mean so much to so many different people. In your mind, what does it encompass? What are the types of events that we're talking about? Where are we headed from a climate change perspective? And what's going to happen if it's left unchecked?
So there are two ways generally we think about climate risk. So the first is what's known as physical risk, which is how's the environment going to change because the weather is different, basically. And what the science is very clear on is that extreme weather events like floods, cyclones, bushfires are all going to increase in frequency and severity over time. There are nuances to that picture, but broadly, that's what the scientists have been saying very consistently. And we're also seeing in the historical data, when we look through it, we're seeing all these extreme events increase in frequency and severity over time. And then we're seeing, so those are extreme individual events, but we'll also see kind of chronic, more gradual events, things like sea level rise, things like temperatures in certain areas, on the average temperatures go up. And there are a range of factors that will change because our physical environment is changing. The other part to climate that we think about is called transition risk. So in response to all of these changes, we are seeing ourselves trying to decarbonize our economy, trying to reduce these impacts as much as we can. And that, I think, actually has just as much an impact on us, if not more. It certainly has impacts far sooner as we do things like switch to renewable energy, switch to EVs, and also change things in our house and move to electricity more. These factors will affect our economy in a big way. They will affect jobs and opportunities. And those are also giving rise to risks to companies, to banks, to governments, to insurers. And that's something else we look at.
You've touched on a number of things. One that really I found intriguing is the changes that may be happening in employment with some of these new industries that will arise over time in response to climate change, and obviously the shrinking of other industries. Could you provide a little more insight as to what you think might happen in terms of the jobs that will be, new and increasing as opposed to those that will be shrinking?
Yes, and this is one of the very hard questions because it really depends on policy and government strategy. Do we have a policy for an orderly transition? Do we have governments making plans on how things will transition, sending signals to the economy? And to be frank, we don't have that in Australia. We're only just starting to have that in Australia about what transition may look like. The federal government has set up the Net Zero Transition Authority, and they are developing 6 sector-specific plans for how the government wants us to transition. We're very much trying to catch up with the rest of the world, and we're very much looking forward to seeing those plans and what they will mean for each of those sectors. And the sectors are no surprises. They're energy, they are agriculture, they are whole parts of industry in terms of aluminium smeltering, how we make buildings like the built environment, cement, steel. All of these things will be affected. Now, however, if we look at those in terms of the employment question that you gave me, they don't necessarily make up the bulk of employment in Australia. And what we have to understand is what's the impact to the supply chain around that, to the services that we actually provide in Australia. So if I can illustrate this with an example, let's think of electric vehicles. Now, unfortunately, Australia doesn't have a car manufacturing industry. We lost that many years ago. And so on the face of it, you'd say, well, we're making EVs, but we don't actually have a car making industry. How's that going to change anything? But if you think about the economy as a whole, we have so many industries and jobs that depend on cars being there. So, we'll have people who fix the cars, right? People who sell the cars, people who lend money to the cars, people who insure the cars. And all of those will be affected because the nature of those cars are changing. And so the types of jobs we need. So if you are a car technician, an automotive technician, where there is a massive demand already, but there will be more changes in the types of skills that people will need to service those vehicles in Australia. So you have to think broadly. It's not just your coal miners or your coal power station workers. It's actually the industries around that actually account for a lot of employment in Australia that we will have to start to think about.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And I think for our audience, financial planners sitting down talking with their clients, one of the crucial things will be, I think, for them to be able to identify those types of employment opportunities and perhaps alert their clients to the fact where their clients may be at risk of losing their job and potentially need to look at retraining. So thank you for outlining those particular industries.